Adrian Newey has just demanded a full investigation into Honda's engine. For seconds per lap off the pace. 160 horsepower missing on the straights. A hybrid system that cannot even recharge to its minimum electric target. And according to leaked commission discussions, Newey told senior figures the car is effectively dragging a dead battery down every straight. This was supposed to be the Dream Alliance of 2026. Newey's most extreme chassis ever built. Honda's full factory return. Fernando Alonso chasing one final title run. Instead, preseason testing ended with the AMR26 parked in the garage, bodywork cut open, emergency cooling holes drilled into a car designed to be surgically compact. Strong for 100 meters. Then clipping. Then helpless. Honda has admitted their simulations did not match real track conditions. They have activated 24-hour crisis testing. They are rushing a new battery specification before Australia. And now the question is unavoidable. Is this just early testing instability? Or has Newey uncovered a fundamental flaw that could derail Aston Martin's entire project before the first race even begins? Subscribe now, because what we are about to reveal could decide whether this partnership becomes a championship revolution, or the next McLaren Honda level disaster. Now let's slow this down, because once preseason testing ended, the emotion turned into something much more serious. Accountability. This was not a minor calibration issue. This was not a setup misdirection. This was a hybrid system that failed at the most fundamental task required in 2026. Recharge under braking. Without recharge, there is no deployment. Without deployment, there is no straight-line speed. And without straight-line speed, the AMR26 is not a contender. It is a sitting target. The numbers tell the story. For seconds per lap deficit reported by both drivers. 160 horsepower effectively missing once the battery entered protection. A car that accelerates aggressively for the first 100 meters, then flattens halfway down the straight as rivals continue pulling away. That is not subtle. That is structural. And when Newey reportedly told the commission that the Honda power unit could not even recharge to the lower threshold of 250 kilowatts, far below the intended 350, it crossed a line. Because at that point, this stops being early days. It becomes a broken assumption. Newey designed the AMR26 around extreme efficiency. Ultra-tight packaging. Minimal cooling margins. Every millimeter optimized around the expectation that Honda's hybrid system would operate within defined thermal limits. That expectation failed. Honda has admitted abnormal thermal behavior in the energy store under aggressive charge cycles. They have admitted that their dyno simulations in Japan did not replicate real track airflow conditions in Bahrain. For a manufacturer at this level, that is not just embarrassing. It is alarming. It suggests the integration process between chassis and power unit was incomplete. And that is why Newey's demand for a major investigation matters. He is not just asking why the battery overheated. He is asking how simulation validation allowed this to pass. How airflow assumptions were approved. How cooling margins were signed off. How a power unit entered preseason testing without surviving consecutive hot laps. Because if this flaw had been discovered earlier, the chassis philosophy could have been adjusted months ago. Instead, it surfaced in public, with emergency cooling holes cut into the bodywork, with Alonso describing the car as powerless, with Stroll reporting violent vibrations from emergency engine maps. And those vibrations are another piece of the puzzle. When electric deployment is limited, the combustion engine must compensate, operating in inefficient rev ranges, generating harmonic resonance, cracking gearbox mounts, damaging sensors. This is not refinement. It is mechanical stress born from hybrid weakness. Now Honda is in full crisis mode. 24-hour dyno cycles. Testing with artificially restricted airflow to replicate Aston's packaging. Manufacturing a new battery specification with improved thermal resistance. For units targeted before Australia. They have even formally requested that Aston Martin widen the bodywork to allow the engine to breathe. And that request is enormous. Because widening the engine cover means compromising the aerodynamic identity of the AMR26 before it has even raced. It means sacrificing efficiency to regain stability. And that is the cost of discovering a flaw too late. Australia now becomes more than a season opener. It becomes a technical audit in real time. If the revised battery survives full race distance, if harvesting stabilizes, if deployment holds down the straight, the investigation becomes internal. If clipping returns, if overheating resurfaces, if emergency cooling remains visible, then this stops being a private dispute. It becomes a public fracture. Because in Formula One, trust between chassis and engine departments is everything. Newey has built championship cars by controlling every variable. Right now, one variable is out of control. And that is why he demanded answers. Not excuses. Not optimism. Answers. Preseason testing is finished. The data is undeniable. And when the lights go out in Australia, the world will see whether this investigation leads to correction, or confirms that Aston Martin's boldest project began with a flaw far deeper than anyone expected. But here is where this story becomes even more intense. Because once you demand a major investigation inside a Formula One project, you are no longer talking about performance. You are talking about trust. And trust, once questioned publicly, changes everything. Newey is not an emotional engineer. He is methodical, precise, calculated. If he pushed for a deep investigation, it means the issue is not just overheating. It is systemic. It means he wants to examine validation processes, correlation data between dyno and track, thermal modeling assumptions, software calibration logic, integration sign-off procedures. Because here is the uncomfortable truth. This failure did not appear out of nowhere. The battery thermal runaway, the harvesting instability, the clipping halfway down the straight. Those symptoms should have been visible during controlled simulation phases. If they were not, something in the modeling chain failed. And when modeling fails in a brand new regulation era, it creates long-term vulnerability. Now imagine the internal meetings at Silverstone. Chassis engineers defending airflow maps. Honda representatives presenting thermal data from Sakura. Each side bringing numbers. Each side defending their process. And in the middle of that room sits Lawrence Stroll, who invested hundreds of millions into this revolution. He did not build a state-of-the-art facility to fight for midfield survival. He built it to challenge the giants immediately. And right now, the giants are not worried. Because Aston Martin is in correction mode, not attack mode. If the investigation concludes that Honda underestimated real-world cooling loads, massive redesign work begins. If it concludes that Newey's packaging exceeded safe thermal margins, the chassis concept requires compromise. Either outcome means months of recalibration. And in a 24-race calendar, months are lethal. Every race spent stabilizing is a race not spent upgrading. Every weekend spent protecting the battery is a weekend not extracting performance. Momentum matters. And Aston Martin has none right now. Fernando Alonso understands this better than anyone. He has lived through ambitious projects that promised miracles and delivered frustration. When he said the car does not run, that was not drama. It was clarity. He knows that 4 seconds per lap is not an adjustment problem. It is a structural one. And here is the deeper risk. If Australia confirms that the revised battery only partially solves the issue, and clipping still appears in high-energy conditions, the investigation intensifies. Because then the flaw is not just thermal. It is architectural. It means the energy system and chassis were not truly co-developed. They were aligned on paper, but not validated under realistic constraints. And that is dangerous in a regulation reset year. Because competitors will not wait. Ferrari, Mercedes, Red Bull. They will refine deployment maps, optimize harvesting windows, improve efficiency lap by lap. If Aston Martin is still debating airflow cross-sections in race 3, the gap widens. So when Newey demanded a major investigation, it was not about blame. It was about preventing long-term collapse. He understands that if the foundation is unstable now, patchwork fixes will only delay the inevitable. You cannot build a championship car on compromised assumptions. Preseason testing is over. The excuses phase is finished. Australia will reveal whether the crisis response was sufficient. If the car runs clean, finishes strong, and shows stable deployment, the investigation becomes a turning point. If not, it becomes the beginning of a fracture that could define this entire project. Because in Formula One, talent is not enough. Investment is not enough. Ambition is not enough. Alignment is everything. And right now, alignment is exactly what Aston Martin must prove it still has. And here is the final layer that makes this even more dangerous. Because once an investigation reaches this level inside a Formula One team, it does not just examine hardware. It examines decision-making. Who signed off on the cooling envelope? Who validated the airflow restrictions? Who approved the integration targets between chassis and power unit? In a brand new regulation era, those approvals define the next 3 years. If they were wrong now, the ripple effect is enormous. The AMR26 was designed with almost no thermal margin. That was the gamble. Ultra-tight packaging to maximize aerodynamic efficiency. Minimal drag. Aggressive rear taper. Everything built around the assumption that Honda's hybrid system could operate at sustained load without entering protection. But Bahrain proved the opposite. Under aggressive harvesting, the energy store overheats. Software cuts recharge. Deployment collapses. Clipping dominates the straight. When that happens, the entire concept unravels. Because you cannot redesign the philosophy of a car in 2 weeks. You can widen the bodywork. You can add cooling louvres. You can run conservative engine maps. But those are patches, not solutions. And patches cost performance. Now imagine the first 5 races. If Aston Martin spends that time validating revised battery cells, recalibrating energy maps, and experimenting with airflow openings, they are not developing new floors. They are not optimizing suspension geometry. They are not chasing aerodynamic gains. They are stabilizing. And stabilization is reactive. Championship projects must be proactive. This is why Newey's demand for a major investigation is so critical. He understands that if the root cause is not identified immediately, the team risks building upgrades on unstable foundations. And unstable foundations crack under pressure. Honda has responded with urgency. 24-hour dyno sessions. Restricted airflow testing to replicate the AMR26's packaging. Manufacturing a new battery specification with improved thermal resistance. Formal requests to widen the bodywork for better cooling. That is serious action. But action does not guarantee speed. Even if reliability improves, peak deployment may be limited to protect thermal stability. Which means Aston Martin could become consistent, but still slow. And in a field this competitive, consistency without pace is not enough. Fernando Alonso's frustration is not about one bad test. It is about trajectory. He knows that if the first regulation year starts compromised, the gap compounds. Wind tunnel direction follows early data. Simulation tools calibrate around early baselines. If that baseline is flawed, everything that follows is distorted. That is the real danger. Not just losing 4 seconds now, but anchoring development around compromised assumptions. So when the lights go out in Australia, the world will see more than lap times. We will see whether the revised battery survives full race stress. Whether harvesting remains stable across consecutive laps. Whether clipping disappears. Whether the widened bodywork restores balance without destroying aerodynamic intent. If it works, the investigation becomes a painful but necessary reset. If it fails, the fracture between chassis and engine departments deepens. And fractures in Formula One rarely stay hidden. Because ambition without execution becomes pressure. Pressure without alignment becomes conflict. And conflict in a new regulation era can define an entire cycle before it truly begins. Pre-season testing is over. The investigation has begun. Now Australia will deliver the first real verdict. And that verdict may determine whether Aston Martin's boldest project evolves into a contender, or becomes a cautionary tale of what happens when integration fails at the worst possible moment.